In the beginning, there was nothing. No earth, no sky, no crashing waves upon forgotten shores. There was only Ginnungagap, the yawning void, a chasm of potential stretching endlessly between realms not yet born. To the north of this emptiness lay Niflheim, a realm of ice and mist, where frozen rivers called the Olivigar flowed from a spring named Hvergelmir. To the south burned Muspelheim, a world of fire and flame, guarded by the giant Surtr with his flaming sword. And between these opposites, in the heart of the void, something miraculous began to happen. The ice of Niflheim met the fire of Muspelheim. Where cold touched heat, the frost began to melt, and from those first drops of water, life emerged. The ice dripped and formed, and from this union of elements arose Ymir, the first of the frost giants. As Ymir slept in that primordial place, he began to sweat, and from the sweat of his body came more giants. A son and daughter grew beneath his arm, and his legs produced another son. But Ymir was not alone in the melting ice. As the frost continued to thaw, it revealed Audhumla, the primeval cow, whose milk flowed in 4 rivers to nourish the giant. And as Audhumla licked the salty ice blocks for sustenance, something extraordinary happened. On the first day of licking, hair appeared in the ice. On the second day, a head emerged. And on the third day, a complete man stepped free, Buri, beautiful and strong, the first of the gods. Buri had a son named Bor, and Bor took as his wife Bestla, a daughter of the giants. From this union came 3 brothers who would reshape all of existence, Odin, Vili, and Ve. In the endless procreation of frost giants, and they knew something had to change. In an act that would echo through all the ages, they rose up against Ymir, the forefather of giants, and slew him. The blood that poured from Ymir's wounds was so vast, so overwhelming, that it drowned nearly all the frost giants. A great flood of crimson swept through the void, and only one giant escaped, Bergelmir, who fled with his wife in a hollowed tree trunk, riding the tide of blood to safety. From them, the race of giants would continue, forever bearing a grudge against the gods. But the 3 brothers were not finished. From Ymir's enormous body, they crafted the world itself. His flesh became the earth, rich and fertile. His blood formed the seas and lakes. His bones were broken and shaped into mountains, and his teeth became cliffs and stones. They took his skull and held it high, creating the dome of the sky, placing a dwarf at each of the 4 corners, Nori, Suri, Austri, and Vestri, to hold it aloft. From Ymir's brains, they fashioned the clouds that drift across the heavens. The brothers then took sparks from Muspelheim and flung them into the sky, creating the stars. They captured the brightest flames and set them on paths across the heavens. These became the sun and moon, forever chased by wolves through the sky, which is why they move so swiftly and never rest. One day, as the 3 brothers walked along the seashore of their newly formed world, they came upon 2 trees that had washed ashore, an ash and an elm. The brothers saw potential in these fallen trees and decided to grant them life. Odin breathed into them the gift of spirit and life itself. Vili gave them consciousness, understanding, and the ability to move. Ve granted them faces, speech, hearing, and sight. And thus were born Ask and Embla, the first man and woman, ancestors of all humanity. To protect these fragile humans from the chaos of giants, the brothers built a great fortress from Ymir's eyebrows, creating a stronghold they called Midgard, the Middle Earth, a realm for mortal kind. And for themselves, high above, they constructed the golden halls of Asgard, connecting it to the human world by a shimmering rainbow bridge called Bifrost. Odin the All-Father, seeker of wisdom. Of the three brothers, it was Odin who would become the All-Father, the chief of the gods. But Odin was never content with what he had. His hunger for knowledge and wisdom was insatiable, and he would sacrifice almost anything to obtain it. In the center of the cosmos stood Yggdrasil, the great world tree, an enormous ash whose branches stretched over all the 9 realms and whose roots delved into the deepest wells of existence. At the base of this tree lay 3 roots, each reaching to a different well. One reached to Asgard, where the Norns, the weavers of fate, watered it daily from the well of Ord. Another reached to Jotunheim, the realm of giants, where the well of Mimir resided. And it was to this well that Odin came on his first great quest for wisdom. Mimir was an ancient being of immense knowledge, and his well contained the waters of wisdom itself. Odin approached and asked for a single drink from the well, knowing it would grant him understanding of all things hidden. But Mimir's price was steep. "The well demands sacrifice," Mimir said, his voice like grinding stones. "Knowledge must be bought with pain." Without hesitation, Odin drew his knife and cut out his own eye, casting it into the well's depths. The pain was excruciating, but as Odin drank from the waters, knowledge flooded into him, secrets of the past, glimpses of the future, understanding of magic and mysteries. From that day forward, Odin wore his missing eye as a badge of his dedication, often hiding it beneath a wide-brimmed hat or hood. But even this sacrifice was not enough for the All-Father. Odin knew of runes, the magical symbols that held power over reality itself, but they existed beyond the reach of gods and mortals alike, hidden in the realm between life and death. To claim them, Odin would have to travel to that liminal space. For 9 days and 9 nights, Odin hung himself from a branch of Yggdrasil, pierced by his own spear Gungnir. He hung there, wounded and alone, forbidden by his own decree from receiving help. No food passed his lips, no water soothed his throat. He gazed downward into the void, dying yet not dead, until finally, in his extremity, he saw them, the runes, glowing with inner power. With a great cry that shook the branches of the world tree, Odin grasped the runes and fell. He had won them through sacrifice, and now their power was his. He could carve them to bring love or death, to heal or to harm, to bind or to free. The runes became the greatest of mysteries, shared only with those Odin deemed worthy. There came a time when Odin desired to understand the magic of seer, a practice of divination and fate-weaving usually reserved for women and considered unmanly by most. But Odin cared nothing for these conventions. He traveled to the realm of Vanaheim to learn from Freya, the goddess of magic, love, and war. Freya taught him the ways of seer, how to journey between worlds in spirit form, how to see the strands of fate and, in some small ways, alter them. Though other gods whispered that this magic was beneath the All-Father's dignity, Odin mastered it, for to him, wisdom was worth any price, any sacrifice, any shame. He would wander the worlds in disguise, wearing a cloak and his wide-brimmed hat, seeking knowledge in the halls of giants, the homes of dwarves, and the hearths of humans. Thor, thunder and protector. Where Odin sought wisdom, his son Thor embodied strength. Born of Odin and Jr., the personification of the earth itself, Thor was the strongest of all the gods, a protector of both Asgard and Midgard, forever standing between the ordered world and the chaos of giants. Thor's most prized possession was his hammer Mjolnir, forged by the dwarf brothers Sindri and Brokkr. This hammer, though its handle was slightly too short due to a mishap during its creation, could level mountains and always return to Thor's hand when thrown. He wore iron gloves to grasp its handle and a belt called Megingr that doubled his already immense strength. The story of how Thor acquired Mjolnir involves Loki's mischief, as so many tales do. One night, while Thor slept, Loki crept into his chamber and cut off all the golden hair of Thor's wife, Sif. When Thor awoke and discovered the deed, his rage was terrible to behold. He seized Loki and would have broken every bone in his body had Loki not sworn to fix what he had done. Loki traveled to Svartalfheim, the realm of the dwarves, and convinced the sons of Ivaldi to forge new hair for Sif, hair of real gold that would grow like natural hair. While he was there, he also had them create Gungnir, Odin's spear that never missed its mark, and Skablanr, a ship that could be folded up and placed in a pocket. But Loki, ever the gambler, then approached the dwarf brothers Sindri and Brokkr, wagering his head that they couldn't make treasures as fine as those the sons of Ivaldi had created. The brothers accepted the challenge. While Sindri worked the bellows, he instructed Brokkr not to stop pumping, no matter what. Loki, desperate to win his wager, transformed into a fly and stung Brokkr repeatedly. Despite the pain, Brokkr continued pumping, though when Loki stung him on the eyelid during the final creation, he faltered for just a moment. The result was 3 incredible treasures: Gullinbursti, a golden boar that glowed in the dark, Draupnir, a ring that created 8 new gold rings every 9th night, and Mjolnir, the hammer. Though Mjolnir's handle was shorter than intended due to that momentary lapse, the gods agreed it was still the finest treasure, for it would be their greatest weapon against the giants. Thor claimed it immediately, and it became as much a part of him as his own arm. The giants tested Thor often, for they resented the god's power. One of the most famous contests came when Thor and Loki traveled to the hall of Tgarloki, a giant king. There, Thor was challenged to 3 seemingly simple tasks: to drain a drinking horn, to lift a cat, and to wrestle an old woman. Thor drank from the horn with all his might, but the level barely dropped. He tried to lift the cat, but could only raise one of its paws from the ground. And when he wrestled the old woman, she brought him to his knees. Humiliated, Thor prepared to leave, but Tgarloki revealed the truth: the horn had been connected to the ocean, and Thor had lowered the sea level, creating the tides. The cat was actually Jormungandr, the world serpent that encircles Midgard, and Thor had nearly pulled it from the sea. And the old woman was old age itself, whom no one can defeat. What seemed like failure was actually a demonstration of Thor's immense power. But Thor would have his true confrontation with the world serpent. On another journey, Thor went fishing with the giant Hymir. While Hymer wanted to catch mere whales, Thor baited his line with an ox head and cast into the deepest part of the ocean. Something took the bait, something enormous. Thor pulled with all his might, his feet crashing through the bottom of the boat as he braced himself, and up from the depths rose Jormungandr, the serpent's venomous eyes meeting Thor's furious gaze. Thor raised his hammer to strike the killing blow, but at that moment, terrified, Hymer cut the line. The serpent sank back into the depths, and Thor was so angry he struck Hymer and threw him overboard. The prophecy said that Thor and the serpent would meet again at Ragnarok, the end of days, and then their battle would be finished once and for all. These are but the first threads in the great tapestry of Norse mythology, the creation of the world, the wisdom-seeking All-Father, and the thundering protector of mankind. But to understand the gods fully, we must also understand their ancient adversaries, the Jotun, the giants who came before the gods and who will stand against them at the end of all things. The Jotun, children of chaos. The giants, or Jotun, are older than the gods themselves. Where the gods represent order, craftsmanship, and civilization, the giants embody the raw, untamed forces of nature, storms, mountains, winter's bite, and the deep, dark places of the world. Yet they are not merely monsters. They are complex beings capable of wisdom, magic, and even love. We have already spoken of Ymir, the first giant, whose body became the world. But Ymir was not simply a brutish creature, he was the ancestor of all giants, and within his lineage lay beings of great power and cunning. The frost giants, or Hrimthursar, descended from him, dwelling in the realm of Jotunheim, a land of mountains, forests, and ancient strongholds. Among the most significant of the giants was Bergelmir, who survived the flood of Ymir's blood. His descendants would include some of the most formidable opponents the gods would ever face. But the relationship between gods and giants was complicated, not merely one of pure enmity. The gods themselves carried giant blood in their veins. Odin's mother, Bestla, was a giantess, daughter of the giant Bolthorn. This made the All-Father himself half-giant, a fact that perhaps explains his complex relationship with the Jotun, sometimes battling them, sometimes seeking their wisdom, sometimes taking them as lovers. One of the most powerful giants was Mimir, keeper of the Well of Wisdom, whose knowledge was so vast that even after he was killed in a war between the gods, Odin preserved his head with herbs and magic so he could continue to consult him. Mimir's counsel would prove invaluable, especially when Odin sought to know the future and the coming of Ragnarok. Another significant giant was Skathi, daughter of the giant Jotzi. Her story reveals the strange bonds that could form between Asgard and Jotunheim. When the gods killed her father for stealing the goddess Ion and her apples of youth, Skathi came to Asgard in full armor, demanding recompense. The gods, respecting her courage and not wanting another war, offered her a choice of husband from among them, but she could only see their feet to choose by. Skathi hoped to choose Baldur, the most beautiful of the gods, but she instead selected the feet she thought most handsome, which belonged to Njrr, god of the sea. Though the two married, their union was difficult. Skathi loved the mountains and the hunt, the howling of wolves and the bite of winter, while Njrr loved the sea, the cry of gulls, and the gentle shores. They tried to compromise, spending 9 nights in the mountains and 9 by the sea, but neither could truly be happy in the other's realm. Eventually, Skavi returned to the mountains, where she hunted on skis with her bow, forever the winter huntress. Yet she earned a place among the gods, and her fierce independence was respected in both realms. Then there was Geir, a giant king who once captured Loki and forced him to bring Thor to his hall without the thunder god's weapons. The giant planned to kill Thor, but on the way, Thor was warned by a friendly giantess named Grr, who lent him her own belt of strength, iron gloves, and staff. When Thor arrived at Geir's hall, the giant's daughters tried to crush him by raising the seat where he sat until it pressed against the ceiling. Thor used Grr's staff to push down, breaking the backs of both daughters beneath his chair. Then Geir threw a molten iron bolt at Thor, but the thunder god caught it with the iron gloves and threw it back, passing through an iron pillar, through Geir himself, and into the wall beyond. The giant died, and Thor walked away victorious, proving that cunning and borrowed strength could triumph over even careful planning. The giants would always represent the chaos that lurked at the edges of the ordered world, the reminder that the gods' creation was fragile and must be defended. Yet they were also sources of ancient wisdom, powerful magic, and worthy opponents who kept the gods sharp and strong. Baldur the Beautiful, the Beloved. If Thor was the gods' strength and Odin their wisdom, then Baldur was their light, beloved by all, gracious, wise, and so beautiful that he seemed to shine. He was the son of Odin and Frigg, and no one in all the 9 realms could speak ill of him, for there was no darkness in his heart. Baldur dwelt in Breidablik, a hall in Asgard where nothing impure could enter. His judgments were final, and his wisdom in settling disputes was unmatched. When he spoke, even the most bitter enemies would pause to listen. He was married to Nanna, and they loved each other with a devotion that was celebrated throughout the realms. But Baldur began to have dreams, terrible dreams of his own death. Night after night, he woke trembling, haunted by visions of darkness and ending. When he told his mother Frigg of these dreams, she was filled with dread, for the dreams of gods often carried the weight of prophecy. Frigg could not bear the thought of losing her beloved son, so she embarked on a mission that would take her across all the 9 realms. She extracted oaths from everything in existence, fire and water, iron and all metals, stones and earth, trees and plants, diseases and poisons, beasts and birds. She made them all swear never to harm Baldur. And everything agreed, for all things love the shining god. When she returned to Asgard, the gods decided to test this protection. They made a game of it, throwing stones, shooting arrows, striking with weapons, and every projectile simply bounced off Baldur harmlessly or veered away. Baldur stood in the center of their gathering, laughing, and all the gods laughed with him, celebrating his invulnerability. But Loki, the trickster, felt no joy in this. Where others saw celebration, he saw an opportunity for mischief, or perhaps something darker stirred within him. Disguising himself as an old woman, he went to Frigg and engaged her in conversation. "How wonderful that Baldur cannot be harmed," Loki said in his disguise. "Did truly everything swear to protect him?" Frigg, proud and relieved, spoke freely. "Everything swore," she said, "except for one small plant growing west of Valhalla, a tiny thing called mistletoe. It seemed too young and harmless to ask." Loki immediately left, found the mistletoe, and fashioned it into a dart. He returned to where the gods were still celebrating, throwing things at Baldur. There he found Hr, Baldur's blind brother, standing apart from the festivities. "Why don't you join in honoring your brother?" Loki asked. "I cannot see where he stands," Hr replied, "and I have no weapon to throw." "I will help you," Loki said, his voice smooth as silk. "I will guide your hand, and here, throw this twig. It will show your respect like all the others." Hr, trusting and wanting to participate, took the mistletoe dart. Loki guided his hand, and Hr threw. The dart flew true, pierced Baldur's heart, and the beautiful god fell dead. The silence that followed was absolute. Then came the wailing, such grief as had never been heard in Asgard. Frigg collapsed, and even Odin, who knew so much, who had glimpsed this moment in his visions, felt the weight of the loss. Nanna's heart broke at the sight of her fallen husband. The gods built a funeral pyre on Baldur's ship, Ringhorni, the greatest ship ever built. They tried to launch it, but it was so massive that they couldn't move it until they called for Arakin, a giantess who rode a wolf bridled with serpents. She pushed the ship with such force that fire burst from the rollers and the earth shook. They placed Baldur on the pyre with his horse and his treasures, and Odin laid his ring Draupnir beside his son and whispered something in his ear, words that no one else heard and that remain a mystery to this day. When they lit the pyre, Nanna's heart finally gave out, and she fell dead from grief. The gods placed her beside Baldur, and the ship was pushed out to sea, flames consuming the two lovers together. Even Thor wept, and his tears fell like rain. But Frigg was not without hope. She asked if anyone would ride to Hel, the realm of the dead, to beg for Baldur's return. Hermr, another of Odin's sons, volunteered. He rode Odin's 8-legged horse Sleipnir for 9 days and 9 nights through dark valleys until he reached the gates of Hel's realm. There he found Baldur sitting in the seat of honor in Hel's hall, for even in death, he was treated with reverence. Hermr pleaded with Hel, the goddess who ruled the dead, to release Baldur. Hel listened and finally spoke. "If all things in the world, living and dead, weep for Baldur, then he shall return to Asgard. But if even one thing refuses to weep, he shall remain with me." Messengers were sent throughout all the realms, and everything wept: people, animals, plants, stones, metals. Tears flowed from all things as they mourned the beautiful god. But in a cave, the messengers found a giantess named KK, and when they asked her to weep for Baldur, she refused. "Let Hel keep what she has," KK said coldly. "I never got good from Baldur, living or dead." Many believe that KK was actually Loki in disguise, having his final revenge. Because of this one refusal, Baldur remained in Hel's realm. The light had gone out of Asgard, and though the gods still lived and ruled, nothing was quite the same. They knew now that even they could fall, and the shadow of Ragnarok grew longer. Loki, the trickster. No figure in Norse mythology is more complex than Loki. He is not truly a god, though he lives among them. He is a giant by birth, son of the giant Farbodi and the goddess Laufey, yet he became Odin's blood brother through an ancient oath. He is called the trickster, the liesmith, the sly one, and yet countless times he has saved the gods with his cleverness, even as he has endangered them with his schemes. Loki is a shapeshifter, able to take the form of animals, other people, even objects. He is charming, witty, and unpredictable, sometimes the gods' best friend, sometimes their worst enemy, and often both in the same tale. We have already heard how Loki's mischief led to the creation of Thor's hammer Mjolnir. But another tale shows both his talent for causing problems and his cleverness in solving them, the story of how the gods acquired Sleipnir, Odin's eight-legged horse. The gods needed a wall to protect Asgard from the giants, but none wanted to do the backbreaking work. Then a builder came to them, offering to construct a wall so strong that Asgard would be impregnable, but his price was steep. He wanted the sun, the moon, and the goddess Freya as his wife. The gods would never agree to such terms, but Loki persuaded them to make a counteroffer. The builder could have his payment if he completed the wall in a single winter, with no help from any man. They thought this impossible, so they'd get a partially built wall for free. But the builder had one condition: he could use his horse, Svaelfari. The gods agreed, thinking one horse couldn't make that much difference. They were wrong. Svaelfari was no ordinary horse. He was immensely strong and worked twice as hard as any man. As winter drew to a close, the wall was nearly complete, and the gods panicked. They would have to surrender the sun, the moon, and Freya. In their anger, they turned on Loki, who had persuaded them to make the deal, and they threatened him with death if he didn't find a solution. That night, as the builder worked with his horse to lay the final stones, a mare appeared at the edge of the forest, whinnying alluringly. Svaelfari, captivated, broke away from his master and chased the mare into the woods. The builder, furious, ran after them, but they had vanished into the darkness. Without his horse, the builder couldn't finish the wall by dawn. When the builder flew into a rage, his true nature was revealed. He was actually a giant in disguise. Thor wasted no time in crushing his skull with Mjolnir, and the threat was ended. The mare that had lured Svaelfari away was Loki in disguise, and months later, Loki returned to Asgard having given birth to an eight-legged foal, Sleipnir, who would become the swiftest horse in all the worlds and Odin's favored steed. But Loki's tricks grew darker over time. His children were monsters born of his union with the giantess Angrboda, Fenrir the wolf, Jormungandr the world serpent, and Hel, the goddess of death. When the gods learned of these offspring, they saw in them the seeds of destruction. They cast Jormungandr into the ocean, where he grew so large he encircled Midgard. They sent Hel to the underworld, where she became ruler of those who died of sickness or old age. But Fenrir they tried to keep in Asgard, hoping to control him. Only Tyr, the god of war and justice, was brave enough to feed the growing wolf. Fenrir grew larger and stronger, and the gods became afraid. They decided to bind him, disguising it as a test of strength. They created strong chains and challenged Fenrir to break them, which he did easily. They forged even stronger chains, and again Fenrir burst free. Finally, the gods sent a messenger to the dwarves, who created Gleipnir, a ribbon made from impossible things: the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. Gleipnir looked like a simple silk ribbon, but it was unbreakable. The gods challenged Fenrir again, but the wolf had grown suspicious. He agreed to be bound only if one of the gods would place their hand in his mouth as a pledge of good faith. The gods looked at each other, unwilling, until Tyr stepped forward and placed his right hand between Fenrir's jaws. They bound Fenrir with Gleipnir, and when the wolf tried to break free, he could not. Realizing he had been tricked, Fenrir bit down, severing Tyr's hand at the wrist. The gods laughed, all except Tyr, who had sacrificed his sword hand for the safety of the realms. Fenrir was bound to a rock deep in the earth, and there he would remain until Ragnarok, when he would break free to devour Odin himself. After the death of Baldur, the gods finally had enough of Loki's treachery. They hunted him across the realms, and though he transformed himself into a salmon and hid in a waterfall, they caught him. They bound him to 3 rocks with the entrails of his own son Nari, which the gods turned to iron. Above his head, they placed a serpent that dripped burning venom onto his face. Loki's faithful wife Sigyn sits beside him even now, holding a bowl to catch the venom. But when the bowl fills and she must turn to empty it, the venom falls on Loki's face, and his writhing causes earthquakes throughout the world. There he will remain until Ragnarok, when all bonds will break, and Loki will sail with the giants and monsters against the gods in the final battle. Freya, goddess of love, war, and magic. Among all the goddesses, none is more powerful or more complex than Freya. She is the goddess of love and beauty, fertility and passion, but also of war, death, and magic, a combination that speaks to the Norse understanding that life and death, creation and destruction, are forever intertwined. Freya came to Asgard as part of a peace exchange after the war between the Aesir and the Vanir, 2 tribes of gods. She is Vanir by birth, sister to Freyr and daughter of Njrr, and she brought with her knowledge of seer magic that would change the gods forever. Freya wears the Brisingdamen, a necklace of such beauty that it seems to capture the light of stars. The story of how she acquired it shows her determination and the price she was willing to pay for what she desired. One day, Freya discovered 4 dwarves, Alfred, Dvalin, Berlin, and Grr, who had crafted a necklace of gold so beautiful it took her breath away. She had to have it, and she asked what price they would take. The dwarves conferred and gave their answer: each of them would spend 1 night with her. For any other goddess, this might have been unthinkable, but Freya valued the necklace and made the bargain. She spent 4 nights in their hall, and in the morning, the Brisingdamen was hers. When she returned to Asgard wearing the necklace, it became part of her legend. She was never seen without it, and its light enhanced her already radiant beauty. But Loki, ever the troublemaker, told Odin of how she had acquired it, and Odin demanded Loki steal it from her as punishment. Even Freya must sleep, and Loki transformed into a flea, slipped into her hall, and unclasped the necklace while she slept. When Freya discovered the theft, her rage was terrible. She confronted Odin, and eventually they came to an agreement. He would return the necklace if she would agree to cause strife between two mortal kings, creating a conflict that would never end. Freya agreed, for the Brisingamen was worth any price. But Freya is not merely a goddess of beauty and desire. She is also a goddess of battle, who rides to war and claims half of those who die in combat. While Odin takes half the slain to Valhalla, Freya brings her half to her hall Folkvanger. The warriors she chooses are no less honored than those in Valhalla, for Freya is as much a warrior goddess as Odin is a war god. She rides into battle on a chariot pulled by two cats, or sometimes on her boar Hildisvini, and the sight of her strikes both fear and awe into the hearts of those who see her. Perhaps the most telling story of Freya concerns the giant Rymr, who stole Thor's hammer Mjolnir. When Thor awoke to find his weapon gone, panic spread through Asgard. Without Mjolnir, they were defenseless against the giants. Loki flew to Jotunheim in Freya's falcon cloak and discovered that Rymr had taken the hammer and buried it 8 miles beneath the earth. "I will return it," Rymr said, "if Freya will come to Jotunheim as my bride." When the gods presented this demand to Freya, her fury shook the halls of Asgard. The Brisingamen snapped from her neck and scattered across the floor. "Do you think me so desperate for a husband that I would marry a giant?" she roared. "I will not go." The gods held council, for without the hammer, Ragnarok might come sooner than prophesied. Finally, Heimdall suggested a plan. Thor would disguise himself as Freya and go to the wedding, and Loki would accompany him as a bridesmaid. Thor hated the plan but saw no alternative. They dressed him in a bridal gown and veil and hung the Brisingamen around his neck. When they arrived in Jotunheim, Rymr was delighted, though he was surprised when Freya ate an entire ox, 8 salmon, and 3 barrels of meat at the feast. Loki quickly explained that the bride had been so excited she hadn't eaten for 8 days. When Rymr lifted the veil to kiss his bride and saw Thor's fierce eyes glaring back, he recoiled, but Loki again made excuses about the bride's eager anticipation. Finally, Rymr called for Mjolnir to be brought forth and laid in the bride's lap to consecrate the marriage, as was the custom. The moment Thor's hand closed around the hammer's handle, he threw off the veil, and his laughter was like thunder. He slew Rymr and all the giants at the wedding feast, and returned home victorious, though he made the other gods swear never to speak of his time in a wedding dress. This tale shows Freya's fierce independence and her refusal to be bartered, even for the safety of Asgard. She is a goddess who knows her own worth and will not compromise it, and the gods respect her for it. The stories of the Aesir are filled with triumph and tragedy, wisdom and folly, courage and treachery. From the ancient Jotun who preceded them to the shining gods who carved order from chaos, each figure plays their part in the great saga that leads inevitably toward Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. Yet even knowing their fate, they live with honor, fight with courage, and love with passion, for that is the way of the Norse gods. Tyr, the one-handed god of justice. Tyr is the god of war, but not in the way that Thor or Odin are gods of battle. Where Thor represents the thunderous clash of combat and Odin the cunning strategy of warfare, Tyr embodies something more fundamental: justice, law, and the honor of keeping one's word even at terrible cost. He is the god that warriors invoke when swearing oaths, the divine witness to binding agreements, and the embodiment of the principle that some things are worth any sacrifice. In ancient times, before Odin rose to prominence, Tyr may have been the chief of the gods. His name shares roots with other sky-father deities, Zeus, Jupiter, and in the oldest stories, he held a position of supreme authority. But as ages passed and Odin's wisdom and cunning proved more suited to a changing world, Tyr became instead the keeper of law and right conduct, the god whose word was absolute and whose judgment was final. We have already heard how Tyr sacrificed his sword hand to bind Fenrir, but that story deserves deeper reflection. When the gods brought Fenrir to Asgard as a pup, only Tyr was brave enough to approach the wolf and feed him. Day after day, Tyr would bring meat to the growing monster, and a strange bond formed between them, not quite friendship, but something based on mutual respect and trust. As Fenrir grew larger, the gods became afraid. They could see in his eyes the shadow of Ragnarok, the prophecy that this wolf would one day devour Odin himself. They began to speak of binding him, but they knew that Fenrir had grown too powerful to be restrained by force or trickery unless they could convince him to allow himself to be bound. When the gods presented Gleipnir, that magical ribbon forged from impossible things, Fenrir looked at it with suspicion. It seemed too delicate, too simple. He sensed a trap. The gods urged him to test his strength against it, saying that if he could not break such a fragile thing, then he had nothing to fear from it. But Fenrir was not fooled. "If this ribbon is truly as weak as it appears," he said, "then you have no reason to bind me with it. And if it is as strong as I suspect, then you will not release me once I am bound. I see no honor in this game." The gods protested, but Fenrir held firm. "I will allow you to bind me with this ribbon on one condition: one of you must place your hand in my mouth as a pledge. If you are true to your word and this is merely a test, then your hand is safe. But if you betray me, I will at least have my revenge on one of you." The gods looked at each other in silence. They all knew that they had no intention of releasing Fenrir once he was bound. No one moved. The moment stretched out, heavy with dishonor, until finally Tyr stepped forward. He looked into Fenrir's eyes, those eyes that had looked to him for food and, in their way, for companionship, and he placed his right hand, his sword hand, between the wolf's jaws. The gods bound Fenrir with Gleipnir, and when the wolf tried to break free and could not, he knew he had been betrayed. The gods laughed at their success, all except Tyr. Fenrir closed his jaws, and Tyr's hand was severed at the wrist. The god did not cry out, did not curse, did not show any sign of regret. He had known what he was doing when he put his hand forward. He had chosen to break his word, to betray trust, because the safety of the 9 realms demanded it. From that day forward, Tyr bore his stump as a badge of the terrible price of justice. He could no longer wield a sword as he once had, no longer fight with the prowess that had made him famous. But he had done what was necessary, and he bore the consequence without complaint. In this, he became the ultimate symbol of sacrifice for the greater good. At Ragnarok, when Fenrir breaks free from his bonds and the final battle begins, it is not Tyr who will face him. That fate belongs to Odin. Instead, Tyr will face Garmr, the great hound that guards the gates of hell. The prophecy says that Tyr and Garmr will kill each other, and in this final act, Tyr will remain true to his nature, meeting death head-on, fulfilling his duty to the last breath. There is another tale that shows Tyr's commitment to justice and law. Once, a dispute arose between two powerful families, each claiming the same land. The arguments grew heated, and violence threatened to erupt. Both sides agreed to bring their case before the gods, and it was Tyr who heard their claims. He listened to each side with perfect attention, asking questions, examining evidence, considering every aspect of the dispute. When both had spoken, he sat in silence for a long while, weighing everything in his mind. Finally, he pronounced his judgment, a complex ruling that gave each side part of what they claimed while ensuring that neither could completely dominate the other. Neither side was entirely happy with the decision, but both recognized its fairness. What made the judgment remarkable was that one of the families had offered Tyr a substantial bribe before the hearing, promising him treasures and honors if he would rule in their favor. Tyr had refused, of course, but he did not expose them or punish them for the attempt. He simply made his ruling based on justice alone, as if the offer had never been made. When the family that had tried to bribe him realized that their gold had bought them nothing, they were ashamed, and they apologized publicly. Tyr accepted their apology and said no more about it. This is the essence of Tyr, incorruptible, fair, and more concerned with right conduct than with vengeance. In the old days, when warriors went into battle, they would carve the rune of Tyr onto their weapons and shields, invoking his name for victory. But they also invoked him when making treaties, swearing oaths, and establishing laws. For Tyr understood that true strength lies not in the sword arm but in the integrity to keep one's word and the courage to do what is right, even when it costs everything. Heimdall, the watchman of the gods. At the edge of Asgard, where the rainbow bridge Bifrost connects the realm of the gods to the other worlds, stands Heimdall, the watchman. He is called the White God, the brightest of the Aesir, and he is the guardian who never sleeps, whose senses are so keen that he can hear grass growing in the meadows and wool growing on sheep's backs. Heimdall is a mysterious figure, even among the gods. He is said to be the son of 9 mothers, 9 sisters who were waves of the sea, and his birth was unlike any other. Some say he was strengthened by the earth, by the sea, and by the blood of a boar, making him something more than an ordinary god. His teeth are made of gold, and he shines with an inner light that never dims. Heimdall's dwelling is Himinjorg, a hall that stands at the edge of heaven where Bifrost touches Asgard. From this vantage point, he can see into all the 9 realms, watching for any threat to the gods. He requires less sleep than a bird, and his hearing is so acute that nothing can approach Asgard without his knowledge. Around his neck hangs the Gjallarhorn, a horn so powerful that when blown, its sound echoes through all the worlds. It is said that Heimdall will blow this horn only once, at the beginning of Ragnarok, to summon the gods to their final battle. One of the most important tales of Heimdall concerns his role in establishing the social order of humanity. One day, Heimdall disguised himself as a traveler named Rig and walked among mortals, visiting 3 different households to see how humans lived. The first house he came to was poor and humble. An elderly couple named Ai and Edda welcomed him in, offering him the simple food they had, coarse bread and broth. Heimdall stayed with them for 3 nights, sleeping between them in their bed, as was the custom for honored guests. 9 months later, Edda gave birth to a son, dark-skinned and strong, whom they named Thrall. Thrall grew up to be a worker, broad-shouldered and capable, and he married a woman named Thur. Their children became the thralls, the laborers and servants who would work the land. The second house Heimdall visited was more prosperous. A couple named Afi and Amma welcomed him, offering better food, meat and bread. Again, Heimdall stayed 3 nights, sleeping between them. 9 months later, Amma bore a son named Karl, who was ruddy and strong. Karl grew to be a farmer, skilled at building and working the land. He married a woman named Snore, and their children became the Karl, the free farmers and craftsmen, the backbone of society. The third house was a great hall, where a wealthy couple named Fair and Moir lived in comfort. They offered Heimdall the finest foods, white bread, pork, and wine in silver cups. Once more, Heimdall stayed 3 nights. 9 months later, Moir gave birth to a son named Jarl, who was fair and bright-eyed, with golden hair. Jarl learned the arts of war and rulership, and when he was grown, Heimdall returned to him and taught him the runes and claimed him as his son. Jarl became the first of the Jarls, the nobles and leaders who would rule over others. In this way, Heimdall established the 3 classes of Norse society, and he was called Rig, the king, for he had fathered the founders of each social order. This tale shows that Heimdall's watchfulness extends not just to the safety of the gods but to the proper ordering of human civilization itself. But Heimdall's vigilance is not without its conflicts. He and Loki have long been enemies, their mutual hatred deeper than most can understand. The two are opposites in every way. Heimdall is constant, vigilant, and trustworthy, while Loki is changeable, cunning, and treacherous. The tension between order and chaos that they represent will come to a head at Ragnarok. There is a tale of their enmity that takes place long before the final battle. Loki had stolen the Brisingamen from Freya on Odin's command, and when Freya discovered the theft, the gods set out to recover it. Heimdall, with his sharp eyes and keen hearing, tracked Loki to the edge of the sea. Both gods transformed themselves. Loki became a seal and dove into the water, hoping to escape. But Heimdall transformed as well, becoming a seal himself, and he pursued Loki beneath the waves. The two fought in their seal forms, battling among the rocks and kelp, until finally Heimdall emerged victorious, the Brisingamen clenched in his teeth. He returned the necklace to Freya, and Loki nursed his wounds in his grudge. This was not their only confrontation, and it will not be their last. The prophecies say that at Ragnarok, when Heimdall blows the Gjallarhorn and the gods ride out to battle, he and Loki will meet in single combat. Each will strike the killing blow against the other, and they will die together, their eternal enmity ending only in mutual destruction. Until that day comes, Heimdall stands watch at the edge of Bifrost, his golden teeth gleaming, his eyes scanning the horizons of all the worlds. He is the guardian who never fails, the watchman who never sleeps, and as long as he stands vigil, Asgard remains safe. The gods sleep peacefully in their halls because Heimdall does not sleep at all. He is the first warning against danger and the last defense against chaos, and in this role, he is irreplaceable. Frigg, Queen of the Gods and Keeper of Fates. Frigg is the wife of Odin, the Queen of Asgard, and the mother of Baldur. She is the goddess of marriage, motherhood, and domestic life, but also of prophecy and fate. Her name means beloved, and she sits beside Odin in the high seat Hlidskjalf, from which they can see into all the 9 realms. Like her husband, Frigg knows the fates of all beings, but unlike Odin, she keeps this knowledge to herself, speaking of it to no one. Frigg dwells in her hall Fensler, the marsh halls, and she spins the clouds on her spinning wheel. She is attended by several goddesses who serve as her handmaidens, each representing aspects of domestic and personal life. Fulla carries her jewelry box and knows all her secrets. Gianna runs errands across the worlds. Hlin protects those whom Frigg wishes to save from danger, and Air is the greatest of healers. Though Frigg is often seen as the goddess of the home, this should not diminish her power or importance. In Norse society, the woman of the house held the keys to all the storerooms and had authority over the household, which was the center of life and survival. Frigg's domain is therefore not a lesser one but the very foundation of civilization, the place where children are raised, where food is stored, where the future is nurtured. Frigg's most famous story is, of course, her attempt to save her son Baldur. When Baldur began having dreams of his death, Frigg's maternal instinct drove her to extraordinary lengths. She traveled throughout all the 9 realms, extracting odes from everything in existence, every plant, animal, stone, and element, making them promise never to harm her beloved son. The care with which she did this shows the depth of her love. She did not simply command or threaten, she spoke to each thing personally, explaining her fear and asking for their help. And everything agreed, moved by her love and by their own affection for Baldur. Only the small mistletoe plant seemed too young and insignificant to bother with, a decision that would haunt her forever. When Baldur died despite her efforts, Frigg's grief was absolute. She had used all her power, traveled to the ends of existence, and still failed to save him. In her agony, she called for a volunteer to ride to Hel's realm and beg for Baldur's return. This shows another aspect of Frigg. Even in the depths of despair, she does not give up. She seeks solutions, she makes plans, she takes action. When Hermr returned with Hel's condition, that all things must weep for Baldur, Frigg again sent messengers throughout the realms. And again, almost everything complied. The stones wept, the trees wept, the metals wept, all things that she had once asked to spare Baldur now wept for his loss. But one giantess refused, and Baldur remained in Hel's realm. Whether that giantess was truly Loki in disguise, or whether she genuinely bore no love for Baldur, we cannot know. But Frigg's second attempt to save her son failed. and she had to accept what even the Queen of the Gods could not change. Yet Frigg's story is not only about loss. There is another tale that shows her cunning and her willingness to protect those she favors, even in opposition to Odin himself. Two brothers, Agnar and Gareth, were once lost at sea as children. They came to shore on an island where an old couple took them in. The old man favored Agnar, while the old woman favored Gareth. These were, of course, Odin and Frigg in disguise, testing the boys. When spring came and the boys could return home, Odin and Frigg sent them off in a boat. But Frigg whispered to Gareth, warning him that his father the king had died and that if he wanted the throne, he should return quickly. Gareth, heeding this advice, pushed his brother Agnar out of the boat and sailed home alone, becoming king. Agnar washed ashore and lived as a wanderer. Years later, Odin and Frigg were sitting in Hlidskjalf, looking out over the worlds. Odin boasted about Gareth, now a great king, while mocking Agnar's misfortune. Frigg countered by suggesting that Gareth was stingy with his hospitality, a grave fault among the Norse. Odin, stung by this criticism of his favored mortal, made a wager with Frigg. Odin disguised himself and went to Gareth's hall to test his hospitality. But Frigg sent her handmaiden Fulla ahead with a message for the king, warning him that a dangerous sorcerer would soon arrive and suggesting he could be identified by the fact that even the fiercest dogs would not attack him. When Odin arrived and the dogs indeed did not attack him, Gareth had him seized and placed between two fires, torturing him for 8 nights without food or water. Only Agnar, who had survived and now served in his brother's hall unrecognized, took pity on the old man and brought him a horn of ale. Odin then revealed himself and condemned Gareth for his lack of hospitality. In his shock and shame, Gareth stumbled and fell on his own sword, dying dishonorably. Agnar became king in his place. This story reveals that Frigg is not merely Odin's wife but is equal in cunning and power. She can scheme as well as he can, manipulate events to her desired outcome, and even defeat the All-Father in their contests. Their marriage is one of mutual respect, where neither can claim absolute authority over the other. There is another aspect of Frigg that is often overlooked: her knowledge of fate. Like Odin, she knows what is to come, including the doom of the gods at Ragnarok. But where Odin seeks constantly to delay or alter fate, gathering warriors in Valhalla and seeking wisdom that might change the outcome, Frigg simply knows and accepts. She does not speak of what she knows, but she carries it within her, a quiet burden that she bears with dignity. This acceptance does not mean passivity. We have seen how she acts to protect those she loves, even when she knows the ultimate outcome. Perhaps this is Frigg's greatest wisdom, to know the future, to understand that some things cannot be changed, and yet still to love fiercely, still to fight for those moments of grace and beauty that can be preserved, still to spin the threads and tend the hearth, because that is what gives meaning to existence. At Ragnarok, when the final battle comes and the world burns, Frigg will lose not only her beloved son Baldur, who is already gone, but also her husband Odin, devoured by Fenrir. Yet the prophecies say that after Ragnarok, when a new world rises from the ashes and Baldur returns from hell to help rule it, perhaps Frigg too will be there, having endured even the ending of all things, still spinning her threads, still tending her hull, still providing the foundation upon which the new world can be built. These three gods, Tyr with his unwavering justice, Heimdall with his eternal vigilance, and Frigg with her quiet strength, represent virtues that sustain the Norse people through harsh winters and uncertain times. They remind us that heroism is not only found in the thunder of battle or the quest for wisdom, but also in keeping one's word at any cost, in standing watch when others sleep, and in loving deeply even when fate has already written its ending. Yet the Norse understood that the cosmos contains more than the shining halls of Asgard and the heroic deeds of the Aesir. There are darker realms, colder truths, and gods who dwell in the spaces between light and shadow, life and death, summer and the endless winter. Hel, goddess of the dead. In the darkest reaches of Niflheim, in a realm that bears her name, dwells Hel, the goddess of death and keeper of those who die of sickness or old age. She is the daughter of Loki and the giantess Angerboa, sister to Fenrir the wolf and Jormungandr the world serpent. Like her brothers, she was born of chaos, and like them, the gods feared what she might become. When the gods learned of Loki's monstrous children, they saw in them the seeds of Ragnarok. They cast Jormungandr into the ocean and bound Fenrir with chains, but for Hel, Odin chose a different fate. He took the young goddess and cast her down into the depths of Niflheim, giving her dominion over 9 worlds within that frozen realm. There she would rule over all who died of illness, age, or any death that was not glorious in battle. At first, this might seem like a punishment, but in truth, Odin gave Hel a kingdom and a purpose. Her realm would house the vast majority of the dead, for not every death can be a warrior's death, and not everyone can feast in Valhalla or Folkvangr. Someone must care for the souls of the old who drift away in their sleep, the children who succumb to illness, the farmers who die in their beds. And so Hel became the queen of the quiet dead, the keeper of those whose endings were gentle or sad rather than glorious. Hel herself is a striking figure, described as being half alive and half dead, one side of her body beautiful and vital, the other side dark as night, decayed and corpse-like. This duality represents her nature as a being who exists between worlds, neither fully alive nor fully dead, the guardian of the threshold that all mortals must eventually cross. Her hall is called Ljnr, which means misery or damp, and her table is named Hunger, her knife Famine, her bed Sick Bed, and her curtains Glimmering Misfortune. These grim names speak to the suffering that often accompanies the end of life, but they also reveal a deeper truth. Hel does not shy away from the harsh realities of mortality. She accepts them, encompasses them, and provides a place for those whose deaths were marked by pain or loss. Despite the bleakness of her domain, Hel is not a cruel goddess. When Hermr rode to her hall to plead for Baldur's return, she received him with honor, seating Baldur at the place of highest honor in her hall. This shows that even in death, even in her cold realm, there is dignity and respect. Hel listened to Hermr's plea, and her response was not without compassion. If all things in the world, living and dead, weep for Baldur, she said, then he shall return to Asgard. But if even one thing refuses to weep, he shall remain with me. This was not an impossible condition, It was a test to see if Baldur was truly as beloved as the gods claimed. If every being in the cosmos mourned him, then surely that love could bridge even the gap between life and death. But when the giantess KK refused to weep, Hel kept her word. Baldur remained in her realm, and she did not apologize for it. The rules of death are absolute, even for gods, and Hel enforces them without favoritism or sentiment. There is another tale that shows Hel's nature, though it is less well known. A young woman named Sigrun died of grief after her lover was killed. Her spirit descended to Hel's realm, but her sorrow was so great that it created a disturbance among the other dead. Hel appeared before Sigrun and asked why she mourned so loudly. "I cannot rest," Sigrun said, "knowing that my love is lost to me forever." Hel considered this, and then she made an offer. "For one night, I will allow him to visit you from Valhalla. You may have this one night together, but when dawn comes, he must return to Odin's hall, and you must accept your place among my dead. Do you agree?" Sigrun agreed, and that night, her lover's ghost came to her in a burial mound. They held each other and spoke of their love, but as dawn approached, he had to leave. Sigrun watched him ride away, and though her heart still ached, she found a measure of peace. She returned to Hel's hall and took her place among the dead without further complaint. Hel had shown mercy in her own way, allowing a moment of grace within the strictness of death's laws. This is the essence of Hel. She is stern but not heartless, inflexible but not unjust. She understands that death is a necessary part of existence, that all living things must eventually come to her realm, and she accepts this responsibility without seeking to make it crueler than it needs to be. Her hall may be grim, but it is a place of rest for those who are weary, a place of peace for those whose lives were marked by suffering. At Ragnarok, when all bonds break and all realms shudder, Hel will release her dead to join the final battle. She will sail with them on Naglfar, a ship made from the fingernails and toenails of the dead, toward the battlefield where gods and giants will meet for the last time. In this, even death itself participates in the ending of all things, for nothing, not even Hel's realm, can stand apart from fate. Sol, the sun goddess. High in the sky, racing across the heavens in her chariot, is Sol, the goddess of the sun. She is the daughter of Mundilfari, a mortal man who was so proud of his children's beauty that he named them after the sun and moon. The gods, offended by his presumption, took the children and placed them in the sky to fulfill the roles for which they had been named. Sol drives the chariot that carries the sun across the sky each day. Her chariot is pulled by two horses, Arvakr and Alsfr, whose names mean early awake and very quick. These magnificent steeds race across the heavens from east to west, bringing light and warmth to all the 9 realms below. But Sol does not drive in peace. She is forever pursued by Skoll, a monstrous wolf who seeks to devour her. The chase between Sol and Skoll is eternal and desperate. This is why the sun moves so swiftly across the sky, never pausing, never resting. If Sol were to slow down, if she were to stop even for a moment, Skoll would catch her, and the sun would be devoured. The gods placed shields, Svalin, in front of her chariot to protect the earth from the sun's full heat, for without this protection, the mountains and seas would burn. Every morning, as dawn breaks, Sol begins her race anew. She rides with determination and grace, her golden light spilling across Midgard, waking the world to life. Farmers plant their crops by her light, travelers navigate by her position, and children play in her warmth. She is the giver of life, the measurer of time, the constant presence that marks the passage of days. There is a story of a young girl who was dying of cold in the depths of winter. The snow had buried her village, and the nights were long and dark. In her fever, the girl had a vision of Sol, shining bright and warm in the sky. "Please," the girl whispered, "let me see the sun one more time before I die." Sol, who sees all that happens in the lands below, heard this plea. She could not change the season or make winter end early, that was not within her power. But on the next day, she drove her chariot closer to the earth than usual, just for a moment, and a shaft of brilliant sunlight broke through the girl's window, warming her face. The girl smiled, feeling the sun's warmth, and in that moment, her fever broke. She lived to see the spring, and she never forgot the blessing of the sun goddess. This tale illustrates that Sol, despite being pursued by a monster, despite having to race across the sky every single day without rest, still has compassion for the beings below. She is not merely a celestial object but a goddess who cares about the life she nurtures. But the prophecy of Ragnarok hangs over Sol as it does over all the gods. It is foretold that at the final battle, when the bonds of the world break and chaos is unleashed, Skoll will finally catch Sol and devour her. The sun will go dark, plunging the world into shadow. This is one of the signs that Ragnarok has truly begun, when the sun that has raced across the sky since the beginning of time is finally caught and consumed. Yet even in this dark prophecy, there is hope. Before Skoll devours Sol, she will give birth to a daughter, a new son, as bright and beautiful as herself. When the world is reborn after Ragnarok, when the fires have cooled and the floods have receded, this daughter will take her mother's place in the sky. She will drive her chariot across the heavens just as her mother did, bringing light to the new world, ensuring that even after the end of all things, the sun will rise again. This is Sol's legacy, not just her daily journey across the sky, but the promise that light will always return, that darkness is never permanent, that even when devoured by wolves and consumed by the ending of the world, the sun's daughter will rise. In this way, Sol represents not just the physical sun but the principle of renewal, the eternal return of light after darkness, hope after despair. Ullr, god of winter, hunting, in duels. In the deep forests and snowy mountains of the north, where winter reigns for much of the year, dwells Ullr, a god often overlooked in the grand tales of Asgard but deeply revered by those who hunt, ski, and survive in harsh conditions. He is the son of Sif and the stepson of Thor, a quiet god who speaks little but whose skills are unmatched. Ullr is the master of the bow, the greatest archer among gods and mortals alike. His arrows never miss their mark, whether he is hunting elk in the forest or defending against threats to Asgard. He is also the god of skiing and ice skating, moving across the frozen landscape with a grace and speed that makes him seem to fly over the snow. In ancient times, warriors would invoke Ullr's name before duels, asking for his blessing of accuracy and skill. Ulla lives in Idalir, the Valley of Yews, trees prized for making the finest bows. His hall is simple and practical, built for function rather than display, much like Ulla himself. He is not a god of grand speeches or dramatic gestures. He is a god of action, of quiet competence, of skills honed through practice and discipline. There is a tale of how Ullr once rescued a village trapped by an avalanche. The snow had buried their homes in the deep of winter, and the survivors huddled together, facing starvation. They prayed to the gods for deliverance, but Asgard seemed far away, and no help came. Then, one morning, they saw a figure skiing down from the mountain peaks, a man moving with impossible speed and grace, barely touching the snow. It was Ullr. He had heard their prayers and come to help. He taught the villagers how to make skis from the wood of nearby trees, how to move across the snow without sinking, how to hunt the winter animals that could sustain them. He showed them which plants could be eaten even in winter, how to read the signs of coming storms, how to survive when the world was frozen and harsh. For 3 weeks, Ullr stayed with the villagers, teaching them the skills of winter survival. When he finally left, skiing back up into the mountains from which he had come, the villagers had everything they needed to survive until spring. They built a shrine to him, and from that day forward, their descendants were known as the finest hunters and skiers in all the North. This story reveals Ullr's nature. He is a god of practical wisdom, of skills that keep people alive in difficult conditions. Where Thor might smash through obstacles with his hammer and Odin might solve problems with cunning or magic, Ullr teaches people to rely on themselves, to develop the competence and discipline needed to face challenges head-on. Ullr is also the god invoked for oaths and duels. When 2 warriors had a grievance that could not be settled through words or law, they would meet in single combat, and both would swear oaths on Ullr's ring. This was a sacred duel, bound by honor, and Ullr was said to watch over such contests to ensure they were fought fairly. The god of hunting understood that sometimes disputes must be settled through direct confrontation, but that such confrontation must follow rules and honor. There is a curious legend that once, when Odin was away on one of his long journeys, Ullr temporarily ruled as king of Asgard. The Prose Edda mentions this briefly, saying that Odin was gone for so long that the other gods needed someone to lead, and they chose Ullr. He ruled well and fairly, maintaining order without drama or conflict, and when Odin returned, Ullr simply stepped aside and returned to his hall in the mountains without complaint or resentment. This brief reign tells us much about Ullr's character. He was capable of leadership when needed, but he did not seek power for its own sake. He did what was necessary, did it well, and then returned to the life he preferred, the quiet life of the hunter, the skier, the archer. He is content with his role, secure in his abilities, needing neither recognition nor praise. At Ragnarok, the sagas do not speak much of Ullr's role, which is fitting for a god who prefers action to words. But it is said that when the final battle comes, Ullr will be there with his bow, his arrows flying true, defending Asgard alongside his stepfather Thor and the other gods. And if anyone can strike accurately in the chaos of the final battle, it is Ullr, whose arrows have never missed their mark. In a way, Ulla represents the everyday heroism that sustained the Norse people, not the dramatic battles or grand quests, but the quiet competence of survival. The ability to hunt in deep snow, to ski across frozen landscapes, to provide for family in the harshest conditions, to settle disputes with honor, to lead when necessary without seeking glory. These are the virtues Ulla embodies, and they are no less important than the thunder of Thor or the wisdom of Odin. These three figures, Hel with her acceptance of mortality, Sol with her eternal journey and promise of renewal, and Ullr with his quiet mastery of winter's challenges, remind us that the Norse cosmos is vast and varied. Not all gods dwell in golden halls or seek glory in battle. Some rule over necessary sorrows, some race eternally across the sky, and some simply master the skills needed to survive and thrive in a harsh world. Yet there are still more gods whose stories must be told. The Vanir who came to Asgard as hostages and became honored members of the Aesir, the gods of sea and fertility, of poetry and inspiration, and others whose presence shapes the 9 realms in ways both subtle and profound. Freyr, god of fertility and abundance. Freyr is the brother of Freya and the son of Njrr, one of the Vanir gods who came to Asgard after the war between the 2 tribes of deities. He is the god of fertility, prosperity, and peace, the one who brings good harvests, abundant crops, and fair weather. Where his sister Freya rules over love and war in equal measure, Freyr is associated with the gentle rain and sunshine that make things grow, with the virility of animals and the fruitfulness of the earth. Freyr is said to be the most beautiful of the gods, and he possesses several wondrous treasures. He owns Gullinbursti, a golden boar with bristles that shine in the dark, capable of running through air and water faster than any horse. He also possesses Sklanir, the finest ship ever made, which always has a favorable wind and can be folded up small enough to fit in a pocket. Most importantly, he once owned a sword that fought by itself, a weapon that would fly through the air and strike down his enemies without him even needing to wield it. But Freyr's most famous story is a tale of love and longing, and it cost him dearly. One day, Freyr climbed into Odin's high seat Hlidskjalf, though he knew he was forbidden to sit there. From that vantage point, one can see into all the 9 realms, and as Freyr looked out across the worlds, his gaze fell upon Jotunheim, the land of giants. There he saw a beautiful maiden walking toward a great hall. When she lifted her arms to open the hall's doors, a light shone from her arms and hands so bright that it illuminated both the sky and sea. Her name was Geir, daughter of the giant Gymir, and in that moment, Freyr fell hopelessly, desperately in love with her. But his love brought him no joy, only anguish. He returned from the high seat and fell into such a deep melancholy that he would not speak, would not eat, would not sleep. He simply sat in silence, pining for a woman he had only glimpsed once, a giantess he could never have. His father Njrr grew worried and sent Freyr's servant Skirnir to discover what troubled his master. When Skirnir finally coaxed the truth from Freyr, he offered to travel to Jotunheim as a messenger to woo Geir on his master's behalf. But Skirnir asked for 2 things in payment: Freyr's horse that could ride through magic fire, and Freyr's sword that fought by itself. Freyr, mad with love, agreed without hesitation. He gave away his greatest weapon, the sword that could have protected him at Ragnarok, for the mere chance that Geir might agree to meet him. Skirnir rode to Jotunheim, and there he found Geir in her father's hall. He offered her 11 golden apples and Odin's ring Draupnir if she would consent to meet Freyr. Geir refused. She wanted nothing from the gods. Skirnir then threatened her with Freyr's wrath and the anger of all the gods. Still Geir refused, unafraid. Finally, Skirnir resorted to the darkest magic. He carved runes of curse and torment, threatening Geir with loneliness, with a life of isolation and misery, with being forever denied love and companionship unless she agreed. These curses were so terrible, so binding, that Geir finally relented. She agreed to meet Freyr in 9 nights' time in a grove called Bari. When Skirnir returned with this news, Freyr was overjoyed, but then he realized he would have to wait 9 nights, and he lamented. Long is 1 night, long are 2 nights, but how can I endure 3? Often a month has seemed less to me than half of this time of longing. But the 9 nights passed, and Freyr met Geir in the grove. What words they spoke, what promises they made, the sagas do not say. But Geir became his wife, and by all accounts, they were happy together. Yet the cost of this happiness was steep. Freyr had given away his sword, and at Ragnarok, when he faces the fire giant Surtur, he will have no weapon. The prophecy says that Freyr will fight bravely with a stag's antler, but without his magical sword, he will fall to Surtur's flaming blade. This is the tragedy of Freyr. He sacrificed his future for love, gave up his safety at the end of the world for a few years of happiness with Geir. Some might call this foolish, but others see in it the very essence of what it means to choose love over survival, to embrace the moment rather than hoard one's power for a distant catastrophe. Freyr chose to live fully in the present, consequences be damned, and there is a certain nobility in that choice. There is another tale that shows Freyr's generous nature. Once, during a harsh winter, a farming community was on the verge of starvation. Their crops had failed, their animals were thin, and they had nothing left to plant for the next year. They built an altar to Freyr and made offerings, praying for his help. Freyr heard their prayers and appeared to the village chief in a dream. "I cannot change what has already happened," Freyr said, "but I can give you a chance. Plant these seeds I leave for you, and I promise you will have a harvest unlike any you have known." When the chief awoke, he found a pouch of seeds beside his bed, seeds of a golden grain he had never seen before. The villagers planted them despite their doubts, and to their amazement, the seeds grew quickly even in the poor soil. By summer's end, they had a harvest so abundant that they could feed themselves through the winter and still have enough to trade with neighboring villages. They honored Freyr ever after, and that golden grain became one of their staple crops. This story illustrates that Freyr's power is not merely about fertility in the abstract, but about practical abundance, about ensuring that people have enough to eat and prosper. He is a god who cares about the daily welfare of mortals, who responds to genuine need with genuine help. Freyr also owns a dwelling called Alfheimr, the realm of the Light Elves, which was given to him as a tooth gift when he was young, a present given to a child when they cut their first tooth. This connection to the elves, beings of light and magic and natural beauty, reinforces Freyr's association with the life-giving forces of nature and the gentle, growing magic of the earth. Njordr, god of the sea and winds. Njrr is the father of Freyr and Freya, one of the Vanir gods who came to live in Asgard after the war between the Aesir and Vanir. He is the god of the sea, of ships and sailing, of fishermen and coastal prosperity. Where Aegir represents the raw power of the ocean, its storms and depths, Njrr represents the sea as a source of wealth and sustenance, the provider of fish and safe passage for traders. Njrr dwells in Noten, the ship enclosure, a hall by the sea where the sound of waves and the cries of seabirds are constant companions. He is invoked by sailors before they embark on voyages, by fishermen casting their nets, and by merchants whose wealth depends on safe passage across the waters. His blessing means calm seas and favorable winds, while his displeasure can mean storms and shipwrecks. The most famous story of Njrr concerns his marriage to the giantess Skathi, which we have touched upon before, but it deserves fuller telling. After the gods killed Skathi's father Jotzi for stealing Iron and her apples of youth, Skathi came to Asgard in full armor, demanding compensation for her loss. The gods, not wanting war with the giants, offered her a husband from among them, but as part of the bargain, she could only choose by looking at their feet. Skathi hoped to choose Baldur, the most beautiful of the gods, so she looked for the most beautiful feet. She saw a pair that were clean, well-formed, and elegant, and thought surely these must belong to Baldur. "I choose these," she said. But when the god stood up, it was Njrr. His feet were beautiful because he spent so much time in the sea, the water keeping them smooth and clean. Skathi was disappointed, but she had made her choice and would honor it. The gods also made Loki make her laugh to seal the bargain, which he did through crude antics, and they placed her father's eyes in the sky as stars, so he would be honored forever. But the marriage itself was troubled from the start. Njrr loved the sea, the gentle lap of waves, the cry of gulls, the smell of salt air, the bustling of ships coming and going. Skathi loved the mountains, the howl of wolves, the crunch of snow under her skis, the thrill of the hunt, the sharp cold of winter air. They tried to make it work, agreeing to spend 9 nights in the mountains at Rimheimr, Skathi's home, and then 9 nights by the sea at Noten. But after 9 nights in the mountains, Njrr complained. "Hateful to me are the mountains. I was not there for long, only 9 nights. The howling of wolves sounded ugly to me compared to the singing of swans." And Skathi replied, "I could not sleep in the beds of the sea, for the cries of birds woke me when they came from the waves each morning. The gull woke me when it came from the sea. Neither could be happy in the other's home." Eventually, they agreed to part ways, not with bitterness or resentment, but with mutual understanding that they were simply too different. Skathi returned to her mountains, where she hunted on skis and lived as she pleased. Njrr returned to the sea, where he remained content among the waves. Their separation was marked by respect, each recognizing that love alone is not always enough when two people need fundamentally different things to thrive. This story reveals something important about the Norse view of marriage and relationships, that it's better to part peacefully than to make each other miserable, that compatibility matters, and that sometimes even gods cannot overcome the differences in their natures. There is another tale of NJRR that shows his protective nature toward sailors. A young man named Eric went to sea against his father's wishes, joining a trading expedition. A terrible storm rose up, and the ship was in danger of being torn apart by the waves. As the ship began to break apart, Eric prayed to NJRR, promising to honor him always if he survived. Suddenly, the storm began to calm. The waves that had been crashing over the deck subsided to a gentle roll. A favorable wind filled the sails, and the ship limped safely to shore. When Eric and his crew landed, they built a small shrine to NJRR on the beach, thanking him for their deliverance. Years later, when Eric was an old man and a successful merchant, he never forgot that moment. He always made offerings to NJRR before sailing, and he taught his children and grandchildren to honor the god of the sea. His family's ships never sank, their voyages were always profitable, and they attributed their prosperity to NJRR's continued blessing. This tale shows that NJRR, like his son Freyr, is a god who responds to genuine faith and keeps his promises. He is not capricious or cruel like the raw sea itself can be, but rather a protective force who rewards those who honor him. NJRR also plays a role in the ending and renewal of the world. Though the prophecies of Ragnarok speak little of his specific fate, it is said that the Vanir gods will survive the final battle, and when the new world rises from the sea after the fires have burned out, NJRR will still be there. He will watch as the land emerges from the waters, as life begins anew, as the survivors build again. The sea existed before the gods, and it will exist after them, and NJRR, as its guardian and master, will endure. Bragi, god of poetry and eloquence. Bragi is the god of poetry, eloquence, and the skilled use of words. He is said to be the son of Odin, though some tales suggest he was once a mortal skald, a poet, who was so gifted that he was elevated to godhood after his death. Regardless of his origins, Bragi is the undisputed master of the spoken word, the one who can craft verses that make warriors weep and turn ordinary events into immortal legends. Bragi is married to Ion, the goddess who keeps the golden apples of youth that the gods must eat to remain young and vital. The two make an interesting pair, Bragi with his ancient wisdom and flowing words, Ion with her eternal youth and life-giving fruit. Together, they represent the power of art and story to keep ideas and memories alive across the ages, just as Ion's apples keep the gods themselves alive. Bragi's appearance is distinctive. He has runes carved on his tongue, a mark of his mastery over the spoken word. His beard is long and flowing, and he carries a harp with which he accompanies his verses. When the gods feast in Valhalla, it is Bragi who entertains them with songs and poems, recounting the great deeds of gods and heroes, preserving their stories for all time. One of the most important tales involving Bragi concerns the origin of the mead of poetry itself, though Odin plays a larger role in acquiring it. Long ago, when the Aesir and Vanir made peace after their war, they sealed their treaty by having all the gods spit into a vat. From this mixture, they created a man named Kvasir, who was so wise that he could answer any question. Kvaser traveled the world sharing his wisdom until two dwarves named Fjalar and Galar grew jealous of him and murdered him. The dwarves drained Kvaser's blood and mixed it with honey, creating a mead that granted the gift of poetry and wisdom to anyone who drank it. They stored this precious mead in 3 vessels, Rare, Ban, and Sun. But the dwarves' cruelty did not end with Kvaser. They later killed a giant named Gilling and his wife, which brought the wrath of their son Suttungr down upon them. Suttungr seized the dwarves and set them on a rock that would be covered by the tide, threatening to leave them there to drown. They begged for their lives and offered him the mead of poetry as compensation for his parents' deaths. Suttungr accepted, taking the mead to his home and hiding it deep inside a mountain, where his daughter Gunnel guarded it. Odin, learning of this mead and desiring its power, transformed himself and tricked his way into the mountain. He seduced Gunnel and persuaded her to let him take 3 drinks of the mead, 1 from each vessel. But Odin drained all 3 vessels in those 3 drinks, transforming into an eagle and flying back to Asgard with the mead in his belly. Suttungr chased him as an eagle as well, and in his haste, Odin spilled some of the mead, which fell to Midgard. This became the lesser gift of poetry that any person might possess. But the mead he brought safely to Asgard he spat into vessels there, and this became the true mead of poetry, the source of the greatest skald's inspiration. Bragi, as the god of poetry, is the keeper and dispenser of this mead among the gods. When a new warrior arrives in Valhalla, it is Bragi who greets them with a horn of mead and asks them to share the story of their greatest deeds. In this way, Bragi ensures that the honored dead are properly welcomed and that their stories are remembered. But Bragi is not merely a storyteller and entertainer. Words have power in the Norse world, and Bragi understands this better than anyone. There is a tale of how Bragi once used his poetry to end a conflict that threatened to erupt into violence. 2 chieftains had a dispute over land that was escalating toward bloodshed. Both sides were gathering warriors, and it seemed inevitable that many would die. But before the battle could begin, Bragi appeared at the boundary between their lands. He sat on a stone and began to play his harp and sing. His song was not about the dispute or the land. Instead, he sang of the families of both chieftains, of their ancestors who had been friends, of the times they had fought together against common enemies, of the marriages that had united their bloodlines, of the children who carried the heritage of both families. He sang of the waste of war, of the grief of widows and orphans, of the hollowness of victory when it comes at the cost of kinsmen's blood. As Bragi sang, the warriors on both sides lowered their weapons. They remembered the connections he spoke of, the shared history, the bonds that had once united their peoples. By the time his song ended, both chieftains were weeping. They met in the middle ground and resolved their dispute through negotiation rather than violence, dividing the land fairly between them. Bragi simply nodded, picked up his harp, and walked away, his work complete. This story shows that Bragi's power is not merely entertainment but transformation. He can change hearts and minds with his words, can make people see truth they had forgotten, can turn enemies into friends through the power of story and song. At Ragnarok, the sagas do not speak of Bragi's fate in the final battle. Some believe he will fall defending Asgard, while others think he will survive with the other gods who endure. But perhaps Bragi's true immortality lies not in whether his body survives, but in the fact that as long as anyone tells stories, as long as poets craft verses, as long as words have the power to move hearts and preserve memory, Bragi's influence will continue. He is the god not just of his own time but of all times, for the power of poetry does not die when the poet dies. It lives on in every retelling, every verse, every story passed from one generation to the next. Idun, keeper of youth. Idun is the goddess who tends the golden apples that keep the gods young and vital. She is Bragi's wife, and together they represent a beautiful pairing. He preserves memory and story, while she preserves life itself. Without Idun's apples, the gods would age and weaken like mortals, eventually dying of old age. She is therefore essential to the continued existence of the gods, though she is often overlooked in the great tales of battle and adventure. Idun is portrayed as eternally young and beautiful, and she guards her apples carefully in a box made of ash wood. Each day, the gods come to her, and she gives them an apple to eat, which renews their youth and vigor. This is not a one-time gift but an ongoing necessity. The gods must continually eat the apples to remain immortal. In this way, Idun holds power over even the mightiest of the Aesir, for without her, they would fade. The most famous story of Idun is the tale of her kidnapping by the giant Jotzi, which we have mentioned in other contexts, but it deserves to be told in full from her perspective. One day, Odin, Loki, and Honor were traveling through the wilderness when they tried to roast an ox for their meal. But no matter how long they cooked it, the meat would not cook through. They realized that magic was at work. Looking up, they saw a great eagle sitting in a tree above them. The eagle spoke, saying it had been preventing the meat from cooking, but it would release the spell if they allowed it to eat its fill first. The gods agreed, but when the eagle took more than its fair share, Loki grew angry and struck at it with a staff. The staff stuck to the eagle, and Loki's hand stuck to the staff, and suddenly the eagle took flight, dragging Loki through the air, bashing him against rocks and trees. The eagle was actually the giant Jotzi in disguise, and he told Loki he would only release him if Loki swore to bring him Idun and her apples. Loki, in pain and fear, agreed. When they returned to Asgard, Loki lured Idun out of the safety of the halls, telling her he had found a grove where even better apples grew, and she should bring her own apples for comparison. Trusting Loki, Idun followed him into the forest with her box of apples. There, Jotzi swooped down in his eagle form, seized Idun and her apples, and flew away with her to his home in Jotunheim. He kept her prisoner there, hoping to use the apples to become immortal himself or to bargain with the gods. But without Idun's apples, the gods began to age rapidly. Their hair turned gray, their skin wrinkled, their strength faded. Panic set in as they realized they were becoming mortal. They questioned everyone about when they had last seen Idun, and finally, they learned that she had been seen leaving Asgard with Loki. The gods seized Loki and threatened him with torture and death unless he returned Idun. Loki, terrified, agreed to rescue her. He borrowed Freya's falcon cloak, which allowed the wearer to fly, and flew to Jotzi's hall in Jotunheim. He found Idun there, miserable and frightened. Jotzi was away fishing in the sea, so Loki transformed Ian into a knot, grasped her in his claws, and flew as fast as he could back to Asgard. But Jotzi discovered the escape and gave chase, his giant eagle form faster and more powerful than Loki's falcon shape. As Loki approached Asgard with Jotzi close behind, the gods saw what was happening. They quickly built a great pile of wood shavings just inside the walls of Asgard. When Loki flew over the wall, they set the pile ablaze. Jotzi, unable to stop his pursuit, flew into the flames, and his wings caught fire. He crashed to the ground inside Asgard, and Thor finished him with his hammer. Ian was restored to her true form, and she immediately gave the gods her apples. Their youth returned, their strength came back, and all was well again, except for the enmity this created with Jotzi's daughter Skathi. But that is another part of the story. What this tale shows us is how essential Ian is to the gods' existence. She may not wield a hammer or command thunder, but without her, even Thor and Odin would wither and die. Her power is the power of renewal, of the continuous gift of life, and she performs this service faithfully, day after day, without asking for recognition or reward. There is another, lesser-known story about Ian that shows her compassion. A young woman, desperate to save her dying mother, prayed to the gods for help. She received no answer from Thor or Odin or Freya, but one night, Ian appeared to her in a dream. "I cannot give you my apples," Ian said gently, "for they are only for the gods. And a mortal who ate one would be changed in ways I cannot predict. But I can show you where to find herbs that will ease your mother's pain and perhaps extend her life." When the woman woke, she found a sprig of an unfamiliar herb on her pillow. She prepared it as tea and gave it to her mother, whose suffering eased and who lived comfortably for several more years. The woman planted seeds from the herb, and it grew in her garden, providing healing for her neighbors as well. This shows that Ian, though she cannot share her greatest gift with mortals, still cares about their suffering and finds ways to help within the limits of what is possible. She understands the value of life and wants to preserve it wherever she can. At Ragnarok, when the final battle comes and the world burns, it's unclear what becomes of Ian and her apples. Some believe she will be among the gods who survive, that her apples will be needed to restore the survivors in the new world. Others think that in the world reborn, the gods will no longer need her apples, that in the renewed creation, immortality will be inherent rather than maintained through constant renewal. But one thing is certain, Ian represents hope, the continuation of life, the daily choice to nurture and sustain, and these things will always be needed, whether in the old world or the new. From Freyr's willing sacrifice for love to NJRR's understanding of incompatibility, from Bragi's transformative words to Ian's life-sustaining gifts, these gods represent the full spectrum of existence. They show us that power comes in many forms, in fertility and abundance, in eloquence and story, in the daily act of renewal, in the wisdom to know when to part ways peacefully. The Aesir are not a pantheon of uniform warriors but a complex family of beings, each with their own gifts, their own flaws, their own stories. Together, they create the rich tapestry of Norse mythology, a worldview that acknowledges both the glory and the tragedy of existence, the joy and the sorrow, the eternal and the fleeting. Yet no telling of the Norse gods would be complete without speaking of those who stand outside the cycle of divine action, those who weave fate itself, and those who guide the honored dead to their final rest. And we must speak, too, of the ending that awaits all things, and the hope that lies beyond it. The Norns, weavers of fate. Beneath the great world tree Yggdrasil, beside the well of Ord, sit three figures who hold power over gods and mortals alike. They are the Norns, Ord, Verdandi, and Skuld, whose names mean fate, becoming, and necessity. They are the weavers of destiny, the ones who spin the threads of every life and determine when those threads will be cut. The Norns are ancient, perhaps older even than the gods themselves. Ord is often depicted as elderly, looking back at what has been. Verdandi is in the prime of life, aware of what is happening in the present moment. Skuld is young, her eyes fixed on what is yet to come. Together, they represent the three aspects of time, past, present, and future, and they weave these into the tapestry of fate. Each day, the Norns draw water from the well of Ord and mix it with the soil around the well, creating a mud that they spread on the roots of Yggdrasil to keep the great tree healthy. This daily ritual sustains the world tree, and through it, all of existence. Without their care, Yggdrasil would wither, and the 9 realms would collapse. But the Norns' most important work is the weaving of fate itself. For every being born, god, giant, human, or creature, the Norns weave a thread. They determine the length of that life, the great moments that will define it, and the manner of its ending. Even the gods are subject to their weaving. When Odin seeks knowledge of the future, it is ultimately the Norns' design he glimpses. When Frigg tries to save Baldur, she is struggling against the fate the Norns have woven. This raises a question that troubled the Norse mind. If fate is predetermined, do our choices matter? The Norse answer was complex. Yes, fate is fixed in its broad outlines. But how we meet that fate, how we conduct ourselves along the path laid out for us, that is where honor and courage and virtue are found. A warrior knows he will die someday, this is certain, but he can choose to die well, to face his end with bravery, to leave behind a story worth telling. The Norns do not judge or intervene beyond their weaving. They are not cruel or kind, they simply are. They weave what must be, without malice or mercy, without favoritism or prejudice. In this way, they represent the ultimate truth that all beings must accept. We do not control when or how our lives will end, but we do control how we live until that moment comes. The Valkyries, choosers of the slain. Riding through the sky on swift horses, their armor gleaming, their spears held high, these are the Valkyries, the choosers of the slain. They are warrior maidens who serve Odin, flying to every battlefield to select which warriors will die and which will live, and to bring those who have died with honor to Valhalla. The Valkyries are both beautiful and terrible. Their names reflect their nature. Gunr means battle, Hildr means combat, Gondel means wand wielder, and Skogul means shaker. When they ride forth, their presence is a blessing to some and a doom to others. To see a Valkyrie on the battlefield is to know that death is near, but also that glory awaits. When a warrior falls in battle, fighting bravely to the end, a Valkyrie descends to claim him. She touches his forehead. and his spirit rises from his body, his wounds healed, his strength restored. She helps him mount a horse, or sometimes he rides behind her, and together they fly through the air to Asgard, crossing the Rainbow Bridge Bifrost to Valhalla, Odin's great hall. In Valhalla, the Valkyries serve a different role. They become cupbearers and servers, bringing mead to the Einherjar, the honored dead who feast and fight in preparation for Ragnarok. Each day, the Einherjar practice combat in the fields outside Valhalla, fighting and killing each other, only to be resurrected at dinnertime to feast together. The Valkyries serve them, honor them, and ensure that their time in Valhalla is glorious. But the Valkyries are not mere servants, they are fierce warriors themselves. There are tales of Valkyries who fell in love with mortal heroes, who intervened in battles to protect those they favored, who defied even Odin's will when their hearts demanded it. They are agents of fate, but they are also individuals with their own desires and loyalties. One famous tale speaks of a Valkyrie named Brynhild, who disobeyed Odin by granting victory to a warrior he had not chosen. As punishment, Odin pricked her with a sleep thorn, declaring she would sleep until a brave man came to wake her, and when she woke, she would be mortal and have to marry. She was surrounded by a wall of flames that only the most courageous hero could pass through. This was both punishment and gift. She would lose her immortality but gain the chance for the love that Valkyries are rarely permitted. The Valkyries remind us that death in battle, while tragic, is also an honor in the Norse worldview. To die old and sick in bed was called a straw death, dying on straw rather than on the battlefield, and it meant going to Hell's realm rather than Valhalla. But to fall with a weapon in hand, fighting for one's people or one's honor, this was a good death, and the Valkyries were there to honor it and carry the fallen to glory. Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. All of these stories, all the gods and giants, all the heroes and monsters, all the love and betrayal, wisdom and folly, all of it leads inevitably to one event, Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, the end of the world. The signs of Ragnarok have been prophesied since the beginning. First will come the Fimbulwinter, 3 years of winter with no summer in between, a cold so terrible that it drives people to desperation. Brother will fight brother, families will turn on each other, and all bonds of kinship and honor will break down. The wolves that chase Sol and her brother Mani, who drives the moon, will finally catch their prey and devour them. The sun and moon will go dark, and stars will fall from the sky. The earth will shake with terrible earthquakes. Mountains will crumble, and all bonds and chains will break. Fenrir the wolf will break free from Gleipnir, the magical ribbon that has held him since the gods bound him. His brother Jormungandr, the world serpent, will rise from the ocean, causing the seas to flood the land. Loki will break free from his bonds beneath the earth, where he has been tormented by serpent venom since Baldur's death. From Muspelheim, the realm of fire, will come Surtr and his sons, the fire giants, their swords blazing. From Jotunheim will march the frost giants, led by Hrym. From Hell's realm will sail Naglfar, the ship made of dead men's nails, carrying Hell's legions of the dishonored dead. And Loki will stand with them, finally and fully against the gods he once lived among. Heimdall, the watchman, will blow the Gjallarhorn, and its sound will echo through all the 9 realms. The gods will know that the moment they have always dreaded has come. Odin will ride to Mimir's well one last time to seek counsel. The Einarjar will pour out of Valhalla, armed and ready. The gods will don their armor and gather their weapons, and they will ride out to Vigrid, the great battlefield where the final confrontation will take place. The battles will be fierce and terrible. Thor will face Jormungandr, the serpent he has fought twice before. This time, he will succeed in killing the world serpent with his hammer Mjolnir, but the serpent's venom will overcome him, and he will take 9 steps before falling dead. Odin, the All-Father, will face Fenrir, the wolf he once bound. The battle will be brief. Fenrir will open his massive jaws and swallow Odin whole. But Odin's son Vidar will immediately avenge his father, placing his foot in the wolf's lower jaw and grabbing the upper jaw, tearing Fenrir apart. Freyr will face Surtur, but without his magical sword, the one he traded away for love of Geir. He will fight with a stag's antler. He will fight bravely, but Surtur's flaming sword will cut him down. Tyr will battle Garmr, the great hound of hell, and they will slay each other. Heimdall and Loki, ancient enemies, will finally have their reckoning. They will fight fiercely, and each will deal the other a mortal blow, falling together in mutual destruction. After all the gods have fallen, after all the heroes have died, Surtur will spread fire across all the 9 realms. The world tree Yggdrasil will burn, though its roots will continue to writhe. The earth will sink into the sea, the stars will disappear, and steam and smoke will rise until even the sky is gone. This is Ragnarok, the doom of the gods, the end of all things. It is terrible and final, and the gods have always known it was coming. Odin has spent ages gathering warriors in Valhalla for this battle. The Norns wove it into the fabric of fate from the beginning. Every god knows their role in this final tragedy, knows how they will die, and yet they continue living, loving, fighting, because that is what it means to be divine, to know your fate and face it anyway with courage. Renewal, the world reborn. But the Norse did not believe that Ragnarok was the absolute end. They understood that destruction is often followed by rebirth, that spring comes after winter, that life finds a way to continue. The prophecy says that after the fires burn out and the floods recede, the earth will rise again from the sea. It will be green and fertile, more beautiful than before. The fields will grow crops without being sown, and all sickness will be healed. Some of the gods will survive. Vidar and Vali, Odin's sons, will live through Ragnarok. Modi and Magni, Thor's sons, will inherit their father's hammer Mjolnir and carry it into the new age. Hr and Baldur will return from Hell's realm, their old conflict forgotten, reconciled at last. They will sit together in the grass where Asgard once stood and speak of old times, of the world that was. 2 humans will also survive, hidden in a place called Hodminas Wood, sheltered from the fire and flood. Their names are Lif and Lifracer, life and eager for life, and from them will come a new human race to populate the renewed earth. Sol's daughter will take her mother's place in the sky, driving the sun across the heavens just as her mother did, bringing light to the new world. The cycle will begin again, but perhaps this time, with the wisdom learned from the old world's mistakes, things will be better. In the ruins of Asgard, the surviving gods will find golden gaming pieces scattered in the grass, remnants of the old gods' games, and they will pick them up and remember. They will rebuild, not Asgard as it was, but something new. They will create a world where the mistakes of the past need not be repeated. This is the final lesson of Norse mythology, that endings are not permanent, that destruction makes way for renewal, that even when all seems lost, hope endures. The Norse lived in a harsh world where winters were brutal, where survival was never guaranteed, where death came suddenly and often. They needed stories that acknowledged this reality, that didn't shy away from tragedy and loss, but that also promised that life would continue, that spring would eventually return, that the sun would rise again. The gods and goddesses of Norse mythology are not perfect beings on high pedestals, untouched by suffering or doubt. They are complex, flawed, passionate beings who love and hate, succeed and fail, sacrifice and endure. They make mistakes, terrible ones sometimes, but they also show remarkable courage, wisdom, and compassion. Odin teaches us that wisdom is worth any price, that the pursuit of knowledge and understanding is a noble quest, even when it costs us dearly. Thor reminds us that strength should be used to protect others, that standing between the innocent and chaos is the work of heroes. Frigg shows us the power of maternal love, the quiet strength of those who maintain homes and families, the dignity of carrying burdens silently. Tyr embodies the principle that justice and honor sometimes require terrible sacrifice, and that keeping one's word matters more than personal safety. Freya represents the complexity of femininity, that love and war, beauty and fierceness, gentleness and strength can all exist in the same being. Baldur reminds us that even the most beloved can be taken from us, and that loss is a part of existence we must learn to bear. Loki shows us the danger of chaos unchecked, but also that cleverness and cunning have their place, and that rigid order without flexibility can be just as dangerous as chaos. Each god, each story, each myth reveals another facet of what it means to exist, to struggle, to love, to fight, to endure, to eventually face our ending, and perhaps, if we're lucky, to leave behind something worth remembering. The Norse people told these stories around their fires on long winter nights. They told them to teach their children about courage and honor. They told them to make sense of a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. They told them to remind themselves that even the gods face struggles, that even divine beings must deal with loss and tragedy, and that if the gods can face their fates with courage, so can we. These stories have endured for over 1,000 years, passed down through generations, surviving the conversion to Christianity, the passage of time, and countless retellings. They endure because they speak to something fundamental in the human experience, our need for meaning, our struggle between order and chaos, our desire for glory and our fear of death, our love for those we hold dear and our grief when we lose them. The gods of Asgard still live in these stories. When we tell them, when we listen to them, when we find meaning in them, the gods continue their existence in our imagination and in our hearts. This is their immortality, not the apples of Aion, but the power of story itself, passed from one person to another, from one age to the next. As we leave the realm of Norse mythology, we carry with us the wisdom of the Aesir and Vanir, the lessons of the Eddas, the echoes of Odin's ravens and Thor's hammer, Freya's tears and Baldur's light. We understand a little better what it means to face fate with courage, to love despite inevitable loss, to create meaning in a world that will eventually end. The stories of the Norse gods and goddesses are not just ancient tales from a distant past. They are living wisdom, eternal truths clothed in the garb of myth and legend. They invite us to be brave, to be wise, to be honorable, to love deeply, to face our challenges without flinching, and to remember that even after the longest winter, spring will come again. And so, the tales are told. The gods have spoken. The 9 realms have been revealed. From Ginnungagap to Ragnarok, from creation to destruction to renewal, the great cycle turns. The world tree stands eternal, its roots deep in the well of memory, its branches reaching toward possibility. May these stories bring you wisdom. May they bring you courage. May they bring you peace.